to Be Informed. My name is Carl Buhariwala, and I founded Be Informed to help people make good decisions. Before I proceed, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Today's topic, communication skills, and we'll be joined by Courtney McCloud of the Hummingbird Effect, who will be taking us through effective communication in the workplace. Today's session is being recorded, so if you do have to drop off early, you can watch our entire session on our YouTube channel in the future. And the session is being hosted in Australia. The information in today's session and seminar is current as of today, and the information is general only. So if you do have any specific queries about how the topic might apply to you, please do consider consulting a professional who can work with you on what you require. The session will commence with a seminar presented by Courtney, after which we'll move into Q&A. Courtney's also kindly prepared a one-page handout, which I will share with registered participants following today's session. So if you haven't registered and you just joined online through the public link, please make sure you go through Eventbrite, so that way then I know which email address to send the one-page handout to. So with that in mind, actually one other housekeeping point, if you do have any questions, please do send them through to me in the chat function, and I will relay them to Courtney for her to answer. So I think that does it. Courtney, I'll hand over to you now to take us through the seminar.
Wonderful. Thank you, Carl. Thank you for having me. I'm pleased to be here to talk to you about effective communications today, and I hope you will bear with me as I do have a little bit of a croaky voice. Communications and what it is debated at an academic level, and there is no one definition. For us today, we're talking about communications that happens between people in the workplace, the many channels that are involved, and the different factors that influence how something is heard and received by the audience. We think of communications, particularly in the workplace, as an information transfer, leader to employee or politician to a country's people, for example. The most effective communications is actually when we see communications as more than an information transfer, and we see it as an exchange, where the leader talks and the employee listens, and then the employee talks and the leader listens. Effective communications is about listening and speaking. Much of the effectiveness comes from listening and then what we do with what we hear. And at an academic level, this theory is called two-way symmetrical communication, for anybody who might like to look that up. A little change of tack for a moment. I want to ask you to take a moment to think about a customer service experience that has stuck in your mind. Maybe it was really good and you walked away feeling positive about the company and happy to purchase from them again. Or perhaps it sticks in your mind because it was such a terrible experience and you swore you would never have anything to do with them ever again. And I'm sure that we have all had both of those experiences. A colleague recently told me about her experience she'd had with her bank. She called to make a fairly basic inquiry, something they do most days, and she was left on hold for hours, given the runaround. They didn't seem to understand this simple query. As she spoke, I could see that the frustration was still with her from this experience. She and her husband actually ended up taking their business elsewhere after this. A really good customer service experience is the opposite. When I set up a mobile phone number for my business, I was dreading having to make that call because of how something seemingly so simple can become really tedious. In the end, I spoke with a customer service agent who listened and understood what I needed straight away. He was efficient in taking me through the process and positive rather than perhaps sounding bored. He also wished me a happy birthday many times over for the following week, and his authenticity in that was very evident. There are multiple factors influencing the good and bad in these experiences, and listening is key to both. Because if we don't listen, we can't understand, and this impacts the rest of the exchange. If we don't understand what a customer needs, we can't be efficient. If we get people the wrong instructions or solutions, frustration builds, and the longer it takes for a customer to feel heard and understood and get what they need, the worse the experience. Communications is not a soft skill. If you are working with people, it is the cornerstone of building effective relationships and ultimately achieving your purpose. I'm going to give you an overview of what effective communications looks like and how to achieve it. I do want to flag that this is a concise overview. People build careers around doing effective communications, obviously, and choosing what to leave out today was definitely the hardest part of preparing. I also made this as applicable to as many areas where communications is used as possible. For example, customer communications, corporate communications, internal communications, which is business to employee, and then external communications, which is business or organization to external audience, such as customers, stakeholders, government, and so on. So I appreciate that we might have people here today who sit across all of these areas. So my presentation is structured to be as inclusive as possible. Next slide, if we could please, Carl. Thank you very much. So let's dive in. Understanding your audience. When you're approaching communications, always start here. No matter how long you've worked in an organization, doing an overview of who your people are so that you can tailor your communications to them is essential. Understanding your audience has 3 broad steps: segmentation, patterns and insights, and integration. I've used an example of an internal audience here, but you can apply the same process to customers, stakeholders, or any other group that you're speaking to. So we start by breaking your audience into groups, and we call these segments. The types of groups that you have should be structured around your specific audience. For example, every customer base is unique, so your segments should be grouped according to the type of customer that you have, the size of their business or the size of the account, the type of product that they purchase, and the years that they have been purchasing from your brand, and so on. We break our audiences into segments for many reasons, including that you gain greater insight into your audience overall and can track the trends among those segments. Once your segments are defined, we start to look at who your audience is within these. And this includes demographics such as gender, age, and cultural background, amongst others. All of these elements give you insight into your audience's priorities and needs. Once your segments are defined, we start to look at who your audience is within these segments or groups. So, and then Carl, if we can just jump to the next slide, that would be great, thank you. In a workplace, one way that we want to break down an audience is by organizational structure to provide meaningful insights into the experience of different parts of your business. And you can break your analysis down into segments like these. So start with the whole workplace, and this is one you definitely want. Then move on to senior leaders and each layer of leadership, and then go into department and individual teams within those departments. Once the segments are defined, then consider who the people are within these segments and look for patterns and insights. So for example, what is their experience level, knowledge and understanding? What has their experience been in this specific workplace? Has there been lots of change? Have you been in a strong financial position? Are people feeling appreciated? And so on. What have people come to expect from their leaders and the organization over time? For example, what have they previously been told? Is what you're doing or telling them now in line with your previous messages and actions? And if not, why not? If you have a white and blue collar audience and workplace, you want to break this down into those 2 segments and do an analysis for each. Break down their expectations, needs, wants, and priorities, because these can vary significantly between the 2 groups and they need to be balanced. Whether you are doing an analysis of a customer audience, stakeholder, internal, or any other, all of these segments and any others that you add will significantly improve the effectiveness of your communications. And this is the first step in listening as well. All right, so now we'll talk about the 3rd step, which is integration. And we don't have time to go into this in huge detail, but I do want to give you one clear example. Once you have your audience segments and then the detailed insight into what matters to them, Your audience analysis can now start to influence your tone of voice, the language you use, and the context you provide in any communication. So for example, if you're providing an update in a workplace, and if your team has lots of new graduates, they'll need more information and context, potentially even support, than a person in the middle of their career or in a senior role. Or if you are announcing a significant change to a process or policy, it's possible that people with longer employment tenures at your organization will have more questions, concerns, or frustrations than those with shorter tenures. And so there you can start to see how those segments inform the way you speak to your audience. Remember, understanding your audience has 3 broad points: segmentation, patterns, insights, and integration. All right, so choosing your channel for listening and speaking. How you distribute your message is as important as what you say. There are so many channels and applications that can be used for communications today. So as we go through, I encourage you to consider those you or your organization use and how to maximize them for your audience. This matters because if we don't provide clear information and guidance to people about how they will hear from us, which is through the channels that exist in your organization, what messages they will get through them and how regularly, we can't expect people to just know. If we have not made this clear, we cannot be surprised when our communications do not get through. One of the most critical elements to achieving high employee engagement is ensuring people know what's going on at the company and in their team. That is your clear vision and then their role within that. There are a lot more communication channels today than ever before, and this can make communicating more complex in some ways. In our example, which I'll go into in a minute, I focus on channels within a business and how they are used to communicate with employees. Here I want to get into the nuance that can engage or disengage people. And while I'm speaking about employees, these same principles apply to other audiences as well. So do keep that in mind because they are about attention and behavior. One of the central issues workplaces have to overcome for communication to cut through is busyness and noise. The more employees are bombarded with communications, the less they take in, and that's just human nature. We only have so much attention and time in a day, as I'm sure you all are very aware. Another key issue is messaging not going to the right audience. Segmenting your audiences mean that people that do not need to get messages that are relevant to them don't receive them. The more messages people get that are irrelevant, the more they will tune out. And again, that's just human nature. So my 4 recommendations here in choosing your channel. First of all, manage communications from the CEO or executive leaders through the communications team so that you have visibility of volume, the messaging is consistent, and you're able to control the scheduling. Number 2, control the audiences through segmenting so that people don't get messages that aren't relevant for them. Number 3, take control of your communication channels and clearly explain what each channel is for and who can send messages from it. In organizations of over 100 people or even 50 plus in some cases, every manager and leader should not be emailing the whole company at will. Establish processes and protocols around all company emails and for each channel, including the intranet, the newsletter, your instant messaging apps like Teams, and any other that you might have. Number 4, minimize your channels where you can. Keep it simple, less is more, whichever cliche you prefer, they are true. The more thinly spread people's attention is, the less engagement you will have. Your decisions have to be right for your workplace. So if this doesn't sound like the right recommendation for you, then just leave it to the side. But where you can reduce channels, it can be very worthwhile. It's really important that each channel has a clear and defined purpose and that the right messages are sent through the appropriate channel to the right audience. And this should be the case for any customer context as well, any stakeholder group, it doesn't matter who. Getting this right is key to communicating effectively. For example, many workplaces have an intranet with a homepage where regular company updates are posted. In my work, I come across people in almost all workplaces who don't even know that there is an intranet. So immediately you can see that something isn't working there. It's really important that your organization communicates to people so that they know which channels exist, what they're used for, and what their responsibilities are. And remember that those responsibilities are two-way. Leaders need to understand where to release messages so that people can see them and respect the structure, processes, and protocols that you put in place. And employees need to know which channels to check for those messages. A few other channels that can be included in your overall plan or strategy include regular company updates, whether they're in person or online, department updates, and they could be alternate months or monthly, quarterly even, a weekly or fortnightly team meeting, and then one-on-ones with your manager. These all form part of your communication channels and streams, and you can harness all of them to make sure that the messages that are critical to your organization get through to your people. Whatever your structure, ensure that the expectations are clear and that everyone knows what their responsibilities are. So then where do organizations do their listening? Is it these channels or others? Well, the first port of call is the manager. And this is really important that managers are given space for this in their workloads. Remember that when we listen, we then need to act. So do what you can, escalate what you need to. Research shows that people want to be heard. So if your organization can't do something, come back to the person or people and explain why. They might not be thrilled, but your effort will matter. Number 2, surveys. These can be very powerful. They provide meaningful insights into employee engagement, brand pride, and many other elements that directly impact a company's bottom line. The best results come from allowing employees to be honest and where companies listen to understand and respond appropriately. Report the results back to employees when you have them. Record what will be implemented as a result, and then report when those actions are complete. Communicate honestly when it's not possible to implement a change or improvement that is desired, and then keep listening after that point. Number 3, some organizations have a direct line to the CEO, specifically for employees to give feedback or comments of any kind. Now, this could be a button on the intranet that goes to a Microsoft form and is managed by someone in the CEO's team. It needs to be handled confidentially, of course, and whoever receives the messages delegates the response to the appropriate person, and this could be a member of the ELT or the CEO. A response to these messages is critical. This can be really effective and help people feel more connected and engaged, not just with the organization, but with your leaders as well. You'll likely get messages from places that you wouldn't expect, which shows the need for a different channel for those who otherwise wouldn't reach out. And finally, number 4, in larger organizations, human resources or people and culture also play a role. Some HR teams have an email address for general use across the organization. Others have an HR business partner for the department who is available to employees for relevant matters. Whatever channels exist in your organization to do its listening, make sure that they are clearly communicated to all staff regularly. This should not be tokenistic because people will be able to tell if it is. So we show our authenticity in this through how we talk about these channels and in our response to any feedback that is given. Know the outcome, or to put it another way, what is the purpose of this message? When you come to communicating with your audience, whether customers, employees, or stakeholders, the first question to ask is, what's the point? Why are we doing this? As the person sending the message, we should be able to answer this with a couple of short sentences or a few dot points. If you can't be concise, then it's worth stepping back to ask, why do you want to communicate and what is the best approach? Here are 3 broad purposes of communications that you could narrow your purpose down to, and it is okay if it's more than one thing, but remember, we're keeping it simple. So first of all, you could be sharing updates, communicating change or information. You could be seeking to achieve transformation or behavior change, or you could be trying to persuade your audience. This is the first thing to understand about why you are communicating. And once this is clear, We now clearly define the point of the message. I have a simple technique for you which helps synthesize your approach, and it's 3 simple questions. The first one, what do people need to know? What do they need to believe? And what do they need to do? So now for our example. I've worked closely with customer service teams, and a common communication need that they have is to communicate updates to their processes. This could be how customers place orders or contact their reps or anything else that impacts how customers engage with them. And any disruption to that process that makes it harder to place orders is very significant. So this is a significant communications challenge that needs to be handled really smoothly and effectively. So our high-level answers to these questions could be: people need to know exactly how the change will impact them. Why are you making this change is also important background information to smooth over any inconvenience, and contact details to deal with any issues so that they know exactly who to pick up the phone to or send that email off to and don't have to rummage around looking for those details. The second question, they need to believe that you care about the service or the product that you're providing them and that you prioritize making it effective and efficient for them. And the third, if there is anything that they need to do, they need clear instructions on what that action is, how to do it, and by when. In order to communicate effectively, as the communicator, it's essential that we're able to simply explain the outcome needed from the message, or to put it more simply, what's the point? And finally, measure and evaluate. So I am going to provide you with a high-level overview of this one today, partly for time and also because there are vast resources available online that you can access at your fingertips. So how will you know if your communications is working? Has it been effective? Well, there are formal metrics and then there are observable metrics. First of all, there are a few observable metrics for us to watch for. Do people do what's asked of them? And how many people have taken that action? Depending on the situation, 100% achievement of your intent can be very rare. So that is not necessarily the marker of whether communication has been effective. Are people talking about the information in the message in the office or even via remote teams? That can also be a valuable place. You can get some insight as to how the message has landed. And both of these provide a general guide. It's not hard data, it's observational. Regular measurement and evaluation of communication is the best approach. All the digital channels these days provide analytics and can be broken down by email or post to help you determine what's working and what's not. This allows you to tweak your strategy to ensure it's delivering the maximum impact and adapt as you go in future. And there are innumerable resources online, even ready-made templates that you can start using to measure the engagement of your communications. All right, if we could jump to our next slide, please, Carl. This is our last one. We've got a few minutes to go here, so we'll be able to get through these briefly. So in addition to an overview of effective communication with broad applications like what I've just given you, and as I said, it's a lot of information, I know, but that is a high-level overview of how we go about effective communications in a variety of settings. I also wanted to speak to the importance of interpersonal communication, because communication is inherently relational. And effective communication in the workplace is about how we present ourselves when talking to another person or people. Communication is more than words. It is our tone of voice, our pace, our body language, including eye contact, and many other things. I want to leave you with some extra strategies that you can employ to improve your interpersonal communication, which will ultimately benefit your organisation, whether a leader or an employee. This will directly impact your effectiveness, and there are many, many resources available online or even at bookshops if you still go to those. So I will leave you with these to follow up once we've gone through them. Clarity. Be clear, concise, and consistent in your communications. Saying more isn't inherently better. Be aware of your non-verbal communications. What is the position of your body and facial expression communicating? These can be just as important as the words you say. And if they don't line up with your words, people can often pick up on that. Talk face to face when you can. It's easy to misunderstand any type of communication, particularly a message that is delivered via written form, because we miss out on all of the other cues such as body language and tone of voice. Face-to-face communications builds relationships and trust and can prevent issues even before they develop. Listen to understand rather than waiting for your turn to talk. Truly listening to people to understand them is one of the most powerful ways to build trust. Whoever we are working with, this is a critical element in maintaining effective communications and relationships. Increase emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence shapes how well people communicate, resolve conflict, and collaborate under pressure, and can determine team performance and leadership effectiveness even more than technical skill alone. Understand yours and others' communication styles. We all communicate slightly differently. Understanding different styles can help improve the effectiveness of how a leader communicates with their team, to other leaders, and so on. It's not just for leaders either. Helping employees develop this understanding and skill can significantly increase their effectiveness in communications. And become good at receiving feedback. Receiving feedback is a part of listening. If we aren't willing to receive feedback, then we won't do the listening part of effective communications. There are lots of courses available on how to give and receive feedback well in the workplace. We learn much more from our mistakes or even just opportunities to improve than we do if we're always getting everything right. Overcoming challenges is a part of what makes work rewarding. So that's all from me for now, at least. Thank you. Back to you, Carl.
Thank you, Courtney. That was a very thorough and detailed presentation, so I hope those that have joined or will join in the future will take away some important information about communication style, communication effectiveness, and how to ensure that your communications lead to outcomes that are desirable. Because otherwise, we can just communicate for the sake of communicating without achieving what we want to achieve. So I'll share Courtney's details on screens. If you do have any specific questions for her, feel free to engage with her directly. And for those who have joined late, this entire session is being recorded. So if you do have to, if you want to watch the entire session in the future, you can. It'll be available on our YouTube channel later tonight. And Courtney's also prepared a one-page handout, which has a bit more detail about some of the information that she's shared throughout the seminar. We'll now head into Q&A. And Courtney, the first question that we've got is in relation to sort of communication plans. You know, you mentioned how various organizations might not have sort of detailed and clear plans about how you communicate, whether it be internally or with your external stakeholders. How have you seen it done effectively, whether it be as medium or large or a small organization, whatever they sit on the spectrum, I guess? How have you seen it done effectively to ensure that employees and the stakeholders understand exactly what they should be following?
If I can just ask a follow-up question, what do you mean by following? So are you wondering about what a communication plan should look like?
Yeah, just in general. So the person has asked sort of, I guess, and even I see it as well in organizations too. Very, very few organizations have detailed plans about how you actually communicate, right? And what the sort of process is to ensure that it is effective. I think oftentimes it's just left up to the project or to the certain team or to the department to sort of come up with their own sort of process. But how have you sort of seen it done effectively in organizations that you've consulted with or worked at that could help others?
Yeah, this is a very big question, and it is it is a little bit one of those things that how long is a piece of string? So I'm just really conscious of how many variables go into making communications effective in the workplace. In the case where there's not a team or a communications person, and it seems to be the case that communication is just tacked on as a part of a project, or people just have to figure it out as they go. Anything that you can do to influence and communicate to, maybe it's a project manager or your manager who then speaks to their manager and so on, that there's a need for a specific focus and process around communications is probably the first step, because I have seen those situations, and this is one of those things that it can be incredibly hard in those situations to know what to do, where you can see that there's a gap, but you're perhaps not in a position to do anything about it. So just to be really frank, sometimes we have to let those things go because we can't solve every problem, even if we would like to. But whatever you can do to draw attention to the fact that there's a need for a focus on communication, for a consistent approach to somebody in leadership who has the capacity to implement that, that's a first step. And then whatever you can do in your patch to show that if you take a consistent and planned approach to communication, you can see improved results, that can then become leverage. Now, of course, there's no guarantees. So that's how I might handle that initial situation. And then from there, it really is about coming back to those principles that I was talking about. In your patch of work, whatever that is, however, whatever your scope of influence looks like, take the time to understand your audience, to be deliberate about and consistent about the channels that you communicate through, to understand why it is that you're communicating, and be consistent in your messages so that you're not contradicting yourself, and make sure that, you know, whatever you're putting out there, whether it's social media or emails or intranet posts, across the board, don't make them longer than they need to be. Less is more. So an old number, I would need to double check this, but they used to say people remember about 10% of what we say to them. With the number of emails and messages that we get through in a day in the workplace, the more we receive, the more we tune out, just because we have to. We only have so much attention. So the more concise you can be in your communication, the more effective you're almost always going to be. And then measure and evaluate. So look at, when I took this approach, how effective was it? When I took this approach, how effective was it? And start to watch over time, whether it's weekly or monthly, how your audience engages with the different types of communication that you send out. What gets a better response? What gets a lower response? And then look at how you might be able to improve those numbers by adapting to the more effective strategies. So if there are follow-up questions to that, please do send them in. But that's probably the best I can answer that question for now.
No, beautiful. And I think we can agree that a communication plan for an organization will be dependent on how that organization is made up and what they do, right? I don't think you can just apply any communication plan and replicate it across organizations. I think there are some general principles, of course, that you've shared, Courtney, but specifically it needs to be tailored to what that organization does, how their culture operates, what the workforce is like, and the size and the mix and all that sort of thing. So definitely a lot of variables, I think, as you mentioned, go into that plan. And I've seen it as well, where I think it's more decentralized rather than being a centralized function.
Yes.
So that way, then at least teams, departments, depending whether they're customer facing or supplier facing or internal facing, can ensure that they develop a plan that's appropriate and effective in relation to what they're trying to achieve. Courtney, just a question on discipline, right? In terms of, communicating effectively. You've said various tips and tricks, right? A lot of them really do rely on the discipline of those that are participating in that communication to have the foresight and the awareness, and also the effort to apply those tips and tricks, right?
Yeah.
And without that, well, oftentimes, some people bypass those for the sake of it, or don't want to put the extra effort in because it takes a bit more time. But in your experience, Courtney, how important is it for the employees of the workforce to be disciplined in ensuring that they take up these points so that they can communicate effectively and overall contribute to better business growth, right? Like how important is that? Because without it, I think you can say all this sort of, you can share all these tips and tricks, but it will just go nowhere, right? If no one actually follows it and applies it day in, day out.
So with this question, is it asking the discipline of the people doing
and the culture,
communicating?
the workforce culture, correct? Yeah,
Work
like how important?
Yeah. So if any sort of cultural change can be very tricky, and particularly in organizations that perhaps have more long tenured employees, change can be really hard because people are used to doing things a certain way. And so in those cases, looking at how you engage a change manager, perhaps, or change management protocols can be really effective in effectively implementing a structure around communications. Something that, and it's ironic, that the communications industry hasn't done well is talking about its own value. But what we do leads to increased revenue, increased employee engagement, which reduces turnover, and increases brand value if you're applying communications principles to the company's brand. And so there is a significant dollar value on the impact of communications in a workforce. So for a start, getting leaders of the organisation, particularly the head of the company, if it's the CEO, and maybe a CFO and the head of communications, to talk about just how beneficial communications is to your leaders so they start to buy into why you do this, is the first point of call, I think, in changing organisational culture. It's not telling people you have to do this. It's telling people why. So one of the books that I know leaders refer to a lot is Why by Simon Sinek, if I'm saying his name correctly, because it's not about telling people that they have to do something. It's about motivating them to do that. And that comes through why. So that's the first thing I would be doing, is starting the conversation about why does communications matter? And if it's about people, if your organization is providing a service, perhaps you're not for profit, or it could be working in the medical industry or education, and it's a for purpose organization, then what you're doing is about people, and communication is about people. So you're inherently going to do what you're doing better by communicating better. You're also increasing efficiency, which, as we all know, saves organizations money. So, and if you're for profit, as I mentioned, their brand, employee engagement, employee retention, all of those things impact a company's bottom line significantly. So why? We start with why. And then from there, you can start to talk about change. And again, you might want to look at bringing in a change manager or implementing some change protocols, but you've got to start top down. Culture is top down, so it starts with the CEO and then you go from there. And working with the ELT is really significant. So your executive leadership team, whoever reports to the CEO, that's really important that they have that buy-in, so that then they are creating that buy-in in their own teams, and so on and so forth. So that's where you need to start. And then once you have the why, and once it's very clear that this is what the CEO expects and that this is what's going to be happening and that people need to get on board with these processes and protocols, or whatever it might be in your situation, then you can start to look at discipline and implement your processes, protocols across whatever area of the business it is that you're wanting to use communication for, including if it is across the board, so that there are consistent practices no matter who is communicating. After those things are done, then you start looking at specifying those protocols and processes and requiring that discipline. And one of the things that gets baked in when implementing that change is consequences. And it's not a kind of you going back to school and the teacher's telling you there's consequences for your actions. It's just inherent, right? Because the reality is that communications teams are often under-resourced and running on the smell of an oily rag, and they can't do everything. And if you don't follow the process, then you're not going to get seen when you want to, because the team can't drop the 50 things they were doing for everybody who did follow the process for somebody who didn't. And that's not seeking to punish people. It's just a natural consequence of not following the process. And so, of course, there are going to be exceptions to that, right? If there is something urgent, critical, a little bit of a crisis that has to organically jump the queue, right? There's always exceptions. We always bring common sense to these things. But those consequences do exist if it's not one of those exceptional circumstances. So they're the main things I would speak to about implementing rigor and structure around a communications approach in a workplace. I'm really conscious, again, there are so many variables around this that impact how you go about it, but particularly for culture and any change, it needs to be top down. Start with your CEO, even the board in some cases, and work through those layers of leadership. Start with why, like Simon Sinek says, motivate people, get their buy-in, then implement your process and your change. And as you do that, there will be some natural momentum that, including consequences, that helps pick people up and take them on the journey. But I have experienced in multiple workplaces the education piece around how to do communications effectively and how to engage with a communications team is really significant. And it can take more than a year to if you're implementing change, for people to really kind of wrap their heads around this and to see that, oh, hang on, if I actually do what they're asking of me, it will work and it will flow. And, you know, we are all creatures of habit, and the majority of people don't like change, which is why change protocols are so valuable. So we do need to be willing to go on that journey with people and help them get to the point where they're willing to be disciplined because they see the benefit.
No, definitely. No, great summary there, Courtney. So I think tone at the top, I think, is important. Your executives and your ELT and your sort of your senior directors are all making it very clear about the importance of effective communication and how and why and all that sort of thing. I think is very important to take them on that journey and get their buy-in. If you don't have the buy-in from your workforce, you're not going to get that sort of cooperation. And just, you know, I think generally organizations will, you know, have communication protocols set by certain teams, whether it be corporate relations or it might be in certain customer experience teams. But generally speaking, I don't think every team within an organization is very clear on what their effective communication plan looks like. And I think we take it for granted sometimes, right, Courtney? I think we believe that communication, you know, we've been doing it ever since we've been born in different shapes or forms, and we sort of think, oh, we're pretty good at it, so why do we need to sharpen this skill further? But whether you are pitching for a tender or you are communicating a piece of marketing or you are presenting a report internally, communication is definitely important to ensure that you get that message across and that call to action is clear, right? So, no, definite. I'm just mindful of time, Courtney. I think we can do one more question, just around. And again, it sort of comes. It's interesting. The questions are all sort of linked to, I guess, invariably culture, right? Because I think culture is really important. Actually, ensuring this actually works. Without
Yeah.
it, you can, certain teams can do it, other teams don't, and then you've pretty much got a, unilateral approach to the effectiveness of communication. But Courtney, in your experience, right, now we talked about certain individuals and pretty much all individuals taking on that, having that discipline, taking on that responsibility to do so. Oftentimes it's not possible, right? Because not everyone is going to be attuned or switched on to always think about how are they effectively communicating, right? So everything about day-to-day BAU work, business as usual work, right? Whether it might be a report that they're writing or a piece of marketing that they're doing or a tender that they're preparing as examples. Who do you think in the organization ultimately should be bearing some sort of responsibility to ensure that when they review that piece of collateral or that piece of tender documentation, whatever it might be, that they actually sort of assess, okay, are we actually effectively communicating the message here? Does it sit with the manager, right? Or does it sit with an external team? Or does it just, in your opinion, Courtney, just everyone just needs to do it, right? Because you can't really have a manager doing everything and you can't have an external team doing everything as well because they're usually under-resourced. So in your experience, Courtney, like where do you think the paradigm sort of sits in that respect? Or does it sort of vary depending on the task?
Well, it absolutely varies. And the first thing I want to just acknowledge is that this isn't easy. The nature of the workforce is complicated. People are complicated, and we shrink our resource availability and we want to do more with less, and timeframes are constantly getting tighter and all of those things, right? Which makes exactly this very thing, along with many others, even harder to do well. So there is no one size fits all, is the first thing. So there are a bunch of variabilities that can help in this process. The first thing is that, yes, everybody does bear some level of responsibility, right? I've always been taught in my career, and even before my career, that I shouldn't hand over a piece of work that I don't think is good enough. It's not done and I can see the ways it's not done. Why would I be handing that over? I knew one leader years ago who would call people into her office after receiving a piece of work and they were submitting to her for review before whatever kind of publication, whoever it needed to be sent on to. And she would say to them, if I don't touch this, are you happy with it as it is to go out? And that lays responsibility squarely at all of our feet, right? And it is a little bit intimidating, a little bit scary. She's not saying, I'm not willing to help you. She's saying, are you sure this is ready for publication and are you willing to put your name to it? They're very different things, right? So if we can only control ourselves. So talking for ourselves first and foremost. Take responsibility for your learning, for what you need to do so that if you're running a meeting, if you're giving a presentation, whatever document you are producing, however it is that you need to communicate well, develop those skills so that you can present something you're happy with, right? Whether that's learning to make better PowerPoints or write better for a tender and so on. If you know you need to do some sort of professional development, talk to your manager. If there's somebody in the workplace you want to learn from, reach out to ask them how they got to where they are and can they show you any tips and tricks and so on. So that's the personal level of responsibility, right? Then within the organization, managers and every level of leadership bears responsibility for the standard that needs to be set, right? And they all need to be clear on what that is so that people are being told preferably once what the standard is they need to hit, not every time it comes back that standard is shifting, right? We don't want to see goalposts constantly being moved, right? So that's a leadership responsibility. And then something that the communications team can't do, because it's in large organizations, well, and even small, it's just not possible for communication teams to review every piece of work or every piece of communication, such as tenders or legal documents and so on, right? There's just too much work happening. Unless you're going to embed a communications person in every team, right? Which I have never heard of that. So, but what a communications team can do is develop templates. And those templates can sit in a central location for everybody in the organization to access, so that whatever it is, you have got something that is branded appropriately, that is exists to the standard that the organization expects. And from the moment you open that document, whether Word, PowerPoint, or other, you have got the building blocks, the foundation to develop that document in the right style and the right look at the standard that the organization expects. Now, of course, that's not everything, because then there's writing. So again, I think that then comes back to being appropriately resourced, right? So that within the teams that are completing that work, do you have people with that skill set to do that work? And if not, then do you need to bring someone in? Do you need a contractor? Do you need to outsource something just for a couple of weeks to cover that need, right? So there are a lot of variabilities, and the responsibility does sit across the board, right? Because it's just not possible to filter everything through a couple of people or one team specifically. And it can be complicated. And, you know, maybe ironically or unironically, the way to actually solve this is to communicate, right? So what do those templates need to look like? Do you need another template? Great. Raise your hand, ask the communication team or the design team, whoever it is in your organization, to develop it. If you're consistently under-resourced from a writing or a proofreading perspective, put your hand up and say, we need some extra support. Is there budget? And just keep talking about it. Because if you don't say anything, then potentially nobody knows. But if you don't say anything, you're also not giving people the opportunity to do anything about it. And it could actually happen that somebody in the organization has solved your problem before, but because you never said anything, you didn't hear about it. So just keep communicating about what does it look like to do this well for us, because the solution will be slightly different in every workplace.
No, perfect. Thank you, Courtney.
Pleasure.
This has been a great conversation, and I think you've shared so many tips and sort of important insights that I hope will be of value to our listeners. So thank you very much, Courtney. I'll just share her details again on screen. So Courtney of the Hummingbird Effect, if you have any specific queries or would like to sort of engage her for any help that you need, please do reach out to her directly. And I'll now come to the final slide, which sort of brings us to the end of today's session, which is to thank you all for attending the Be Informed session. The session is being recorded, so if you have joined late, you can always watch the entire session on our YouTube channel later tonight moving forward. And Courtney's also prepared a one-page handout, which I will share with registered participants by email. So that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you again, Courtney, for your time and for sharing some really great information about effective communication in the workplace. And if you've enjoyed this seminar, this session in general, you can refer it to family and friends if you wish, or follow us on our social media channels. But that's all for now. So thank you all for attending, and I'll now formally close the session. Bye for now.